Hello, everybody. Welcome back again. So here we are, Jacqui and Michael, ready to talk the next segment of our Bhagavad Gita text that we're exploring. Welcome, Michael, and straight over to you today.
Okay, Jacqui, hello. Welcome to you. Welcome to fellow listeners. I'll get straight into it, Jacqui. Last week we began chapter 5 on renunciation, and we found a confused Arjuna asking Krishna which of the two paths of knowledge or action was best for his spiritual growth. Krishna told him that both paths were basically the same, but as he was a man of action, as we all are, the path of action was preferable for him. But he's already given him some knowledge, but now he's wondering, now you're giving me action, so which one? So we're sticking with action at this stage. The emphasis was in understanding the need to renounce worldly egoic desires and thus focus more on our divine aspect. So we can't just get rid of something in our life, Jacqui, we've got to change it. So by getting rid of the egoic ones, we've got to replace that with divine aspirations. So that's the transformation that's taking place with this knowledge and with the renunciation of letting go what's untrue. So in other words, he's teaching him reminding him, explaining to him how to live in the mortal world, operating from his higher or immortal self. And at the end of the podcast last week, I said I'd give two simple examples, Jacqui, to illustrate this, which I'll give now. The first example is dealing with a film. So we've all been to films, so we know what the basic setup is. So if we go to the theatre to watch a movie, there'll be a blank screen, there'll be a film, and there'll be a projector with a light in it. We all understand that. And that even happens with home movie theatres and stuff like that. The same sort of principle applies. So the story here is that the enlightened Jnani, the person who understands all this knowledge and how everything works, watches this movie. Watching this movie, sees himself as the light in the projector, as the primeval source of all that happens when the movie depicting the entire range of life's activities is projected onto the screen. Whilst watching the movie, he remains a silent witness, and this is a big part of our journey, to become more and more a witness to what's taking place in our minds and in our emotions in particular. So while watching, he remains a silent witness to whatever is projected on the screen, whether it's a tragedy or a comedy. Everyone else in the theatre is fully identified and immersed in the film, which is depicting the world around us, which we're all part of. So there's love stories, there's war stories, there's criminal stories, there's all sorts of stories in films, aren't there, Jacqui? And that includes, of course, watching on TV or podcasts or wherever it might be. And Shakespeare, in one of his plays, refers to this, and many people would be familiar with the quote, where he says, the whole world's a stage and we're all mere actors on it. And we go behind the curtains and the scenes to change costumes and to get ready for a different part of our daily life. So in the course of a day, we're changing our facial appearance, our demeanour, our costumes even, our clothing, depending on what it is, what we're doing. So, for example, we come home from work and there's a nice evening we're going out for. Both the man and the woman put on nicer clothes than their work clothes, sort of tidy themselves up. They go out and then they're playing a different role to what they were during the day when they were both in their work sort of situations. So we're constantly, as human beings, changing our roles throughout the day, throughout our lives. But so to finish off this analogy with the film, we understand that when the film finishes, everyone, the actors and the audience, just goes back home and says, oh, that was a film, and says, well, that had nothing to do with me. But in actual fact, the film's depicting our lives, that we're these actors, and we don't switch off. We just keep on sort of acting day after day and not standing back and saying, oh, this is just all playing out on a screen. So we believe our own, what we call me and my mortal life. That's the film that I'm part of, and I can't sort of escape it or get out of it in any way. So when everyone, normally leaves the film or finishes watching a show, they go, and they realise that none of it was real. Even if they cried in the film or laughed real heartily or whatever, they still think, oh well, that was just the film I was watching. So it is the same with our lives. If we stop back, we can sort of see what acts we're playing and how we're playing them, either good or bad or ugly, as the saying goes. All right, Jackie?
Sounds
So
good.
the other illustration is slightly different, but nevertheless it has the same sort of tone to it, and it's depicting a lotus flower or a lily pad leaf. And then the lotus flower is a favourite flower in the Sanskrit scriptures of the East. It's born in the mud at the bottom of a lake. The lotus flower grows up through the water, rises above the surface, and blossoms towards the sun. It has very large round leaves like big dinner plates, which are waterproof so that the water runs off the surface, and and yet the underside of the leaf is always in contact with the water. So we can visualise that, can't we, Jackie? The leaf above the water, there's no water on the leaf, and above, below the water, it's constantly in touch. And it's a lovely example, which I'll expand on further on. So likewise, we're now growing up through the murky waters of life's experiences towards the light. And like the lotus leaf, we're constantly in contact with the world on the shady underside, yet capable of existing happily on the sunny upper side. Bit of upper and under there. So we understand, I think everyone understands what I'm trying to say there. So the sun's shining constantly on the leaf, which is the equivalent of the light of consciousness for the human being, but the underside is shielded from that light of consciousness to some extent. We can obviously still access it, but we have to shift ourselves onto the upper side of the leaf, whereas the underside is constantly like in the shade, and that's the shade of the light of consciousness. So that's why we then, as human beings, by and large, all across the planet, are fully immersed basically underneath the lotus leaf. And that's where it's darker in there, and that's the references in any of the material people are reading or understanding, called the darkness of ignorance. And then the light of true knowledge is on the upper side of the leaf. And Jesus refers to there also, for those that are interested in the Christian part of the spiritual teaching. When prior to his crucifixion, he prays to his Father and asks that he gives his disciples some extra guidance. And he says, because they're of this world, but not of this world. So he's saying they've done a lot of work and they're spending a lot of time on top of the lotus leaf, but they're still connected to the world. So all beings, even when they're realised, are still part of the world. Their feet are planted firmly on terra firma, aren't they? But you can, what we're all trying to do, listeners and Jackie, is understand this dual nature, what's called the dual nature, and we want to more and more be on that upper side of the lotus leaf and not in the shady path below the water, connecting with the constant connection with worldly affairs. All right, Jackie?
A beautiful example. I think people will relate with that strongly.
Okay. So just a finishing couple of lines to tidy that up. So when we're watching the film of Me and My Life, we need to remember that we are the light, not the movie. All that's taking place on the screen changes constantly, has got no real substance of, any lasting consequence, and we need to sort of come to understand that clearly. Or if we think of the lotus leaf or the flower, we need to remember that we're the surface of the leaf, the immortal aspect, not the underside of the leaf, which is in constant contact with the waters of the mortal world. And I've just elaborated a bit on that already. All right, Jackie?
Mm-hmm.
So that just gives an example of what we've already been looking at in the first podcast of chapter 5. And now I'll continue on with the remainder of my material on renunciation to complete chapter 5. This is the second podcast. So last week, Jacqui, you mentioned early in the podcast how when instinctively you tensed up or felt a bit of anxiety when I mentioned the words renunciation or sacrifice or surrender or letting go. And we had a little discussion on that, didn't we? Well, you're not alone in that regard. And listeners, if you sort of experienced similar, well, you're not alone. I was the same. Everyone on the planet's the same. When we start looking at new material and start getting knowledge and start understanding that there's stuff within us, mainly in our emotional and mental aspect, that's false. It's untrue. It's unreal, just like the movie. And we've continually thought it was true, and we believed it. Sometimes we believe everything we see on a film or a movie. So the work we're all doing when we're now seeking truth, we're on the journey of truth. That requires looking at life differently, making fundamental changes really in our life. And so renunciation, this letting go, is an important aspect, very, very important. Because if you don't understand this and then don't follow through on it, well, it's the old story. You'll just keep getting what you've always got as a human being. But everyone listening, Jacqui, is wanting to make changes, otherwise they wouldn't be listening. And so this is the process. This is the teachings of Krishna as to what needs to take place. So I'm very confident that the following discussions we're going to have in this next half hour or so, Jacqui, will dispel any of these notions or feelings for both you and all of our listeners. Firstly, I'd like to put the focus clearly on the word renunciation. That's the title of chapter 5 of the Gita, the whole title, the whole chapter 5, renunciation. So that's why I'm emphasising it very strongly, listeners. Every chapter is beautiful, every chapter is important, but some to me just have a little bit greater degree of importance. So on our spiritual journey in our search for truth, the aspirant, which is all us, the seekers of truth, people who listen to these sorts of podcasts, reading this sort of material, are often frequently confronted with the word renunciation. It crops up in all the great works, Jacqui. Everywhere there's the word surrender and let go and sacrifice and so on and renounce. So often it's a word that's not clearly understood. It's a word that's often totally misunderstood, as in your example, how you felt last week when it instantly arose in you. It frequently strikes fear into the heart and mind of the aspirant. However, with a clear understanding, the word is actually one of joy. Now that can sound pretty crazy, can't it? Let me assure you, Jacqui, and listeners, that that's exactly what it is. So initially we think it's fear and trepidation and a bit of anxiety and I'm not sure I like the sound of this, but as we come to understand, which I think I'll explain very clearly in the remainder of the podcast, it actually turns to great joy. Yes, we've become so glad that we've seen through a big part of the veil of ignorance and realising that now what my job is, I'm going to have to look closely inside, and I'll show the diagram again of the mental and emotional aspect where all our memories are stored on that USB stick that I've referred to, our computer program, and we need to delete a lot of stuff that's there. And we'll want to do it because we'll be seeing that it's not true, it's not real, and it's not doing us any good. It's actually causing us a lot of harm, mentally and emotionally and so on. So why wouldn't you want to renounce and let it go? But when you don't know, when you haven't got the knowledge, you're just convinced, well, this is how life is. It's happening to everyone, all my friends, they're all crying and they're all happy and they're all this and they're all that. So I'm just the same. So that must be how it is. Well, it's not how it is at all. It's only how it is when we don't have the knowledge and we're stuck in that sort of rut. And that's why we have these continuous cycles of birth and death, birth and death, birth and death, each one trying to teach us and give us experiences and understanding so we eventually can break free of it. And that's how what's called breaking free of the cycles of birth and death. All right, Jacqui?
Sounds good.
All right. Yeah, you still got a little bit of a question mark there, but anyway, I'll continue on, and we'll get rid of that. Don't worry.
Sounds good, as in I'm sure we're all here with open ears, ready to learn and entertain new thoughts and ideas.
Okay. You don't think I'm overwhelming everyone at this point, Jacqui?
I don't think so. No, I
No?
think there might
Okay.
have been bigger moments of overwhelm in earlier episodes. No, I think we're tracking well.
Right, good. So simply put, it is the letting go or non-attachment to our erroneous physical, mental, and emotional activities or desires that's keeping us in this bondage. So the discriminating mind, what I call the buddhi, is turned away from the world of sense objects. As we're understanding our higher self and wanting to operate from that, we're not as interested in the film as we used to be, the film of me and my life. It's still a big part, but we're viewing it differently. That's the big thing, viewing it differently. Even more simply put, if you want to enjoy life and eventual enlightenment, you have to renounce not the world, but your ego. So we're zeroing in now, Jacqui, very specifically on where the culprit, where the problem is in every human being's life. It's our own ego. Okay? And that it was explained in the early part of the Gita when I was describing about the chariot. And it's got the reins on the 5 horses, which are 5 senses, and there's 2 entities within us. In the Gita, it shows a picture of Krishna that's depicting our buddhi, our higher self, and it shows a picture of Arjuna that's depicting the normal human being under the rule of ego. And it's who's holding the reins on the chariot that comes out victorious. Up until now, I put to all our listeners, you've all basically handed your reins over. We've all handed our reins over more often than not to the ego, and it hasn't served us much useful purpose. So now we're understanding more, we're more determined, becoming more determined to make sure that our higher self, our divine aspect, the buddhi, is in control as often as we'd like it to be. Okay, Jacqui? So now I'd like to discuss renunciation at 3 different levels. And just quickly, there's the notion of the what's called the sannyasin in the Eastern teachings. It's the picture of a person in a loincloth, a walking stick, and a begging bowl. They've renounced everything in life, total renunciate. Described as one who's severely abstinent, austere, and has retired into solitude to become empty of possessions, dreams, pleasures, and sorrows. So don't be worried, Jacqui, don't be worried, listeners, don't be worried, me. That's not for us. It's for a few people, and there's a reason for that, and they're doing what they need to be doing. We live in where we come under the umbrella of the householder, Jacqui. So Krishna understands, God understands that we're leading the lives we're leading. Marriages, children, jobs, houses, mortgages, all of these sorts of things. And so we operate under a different area. But nevertheless, we've got 2 aspects of where we got to renounce as well, similar to the sannyasin, but not to that extreme. Our 2 areas of renunciation are on our journey home, on a subtle level, letting go mentally and letting go emotionally. So it's all up here in the mind and it's all here in the heart. And that's our treasure trove, and that's where we store all our treasures. But they're trinkets. They're not real gold. They're not real diamonds. They're not real pearls. They're imitations. But we believe them to be real and we treasure them. Well, we're now starting to get very suspicious that they're not the real thing, and we're going to look at them very closely. And we're going to be doing that basically, Jacqui, for the rest of our lives. We're going to keep looking and keep sorting out which ones are true, pure gold, pure diamond, and which ones are imitation. And we're going to let go the ones that are imitations because we're only going to be interested in the worth of the real ones. And that's really saying simply we're going to discard what's what's mortal in our being, and more value what's immortal in our being. All right? And that's not all that difficult. It's just it needs work, of course, like we're all doing, but it's not impossible. God doesn't give us all these teachings and give us these lifetimes and make it something that's impossible for hardly anyone to achieve. It can be achieved, but we've got to follow the rules and the understanding and the teachings that go with it. And so I'll continue on, Jacqui. it takes us right back to chapter 1 when we're talking about this mental and emotional letting go or fighting the battle there. So in chapter 1, remember, it was all about the battle scene. And in there, Gita, Arjuna, at the scene of battle, is symbolically fighting, that is, renouncing or sacrificing his inner demons. So he's got all those problems of his cousins pinching his kingdom and not wanting to give it back, which is our ego pinching our kingdom from us and not wanting to give it back. So that's the battle. That's the battle within. So what we need to focus on is these following aspects, Jacqui and listeners. We need to focus on our identification with the role we play in our dream creation called me and my life. So we've got to we've got to, there's that saying, an unexamined life is not worth living. Can't remember which great master or philosopher said that, could have even been Einstein, but it's very true. Yeah, an unexamined life. Well, we've led many unexamined lives, you and me and everyone else listening. We're now wanting to lead one that's examined. We're putting it under the microscope. We want to look at it very carefully. We also need to look at or focus on our attachments to the physical objects. And they're not just like houses or cars, but their children and their wives and so on. And there's also non-physical objects that we focus on and value, our ideas and our beliefs. And I'll expand on that in a few lines. And we also, so there's a saying about the possessions. It's not the objects or the possessions, it's how you view them that cause you problems. Another way of saying it that probably most people would be familiar with is don't be possessed by your possessions. So if we think of our possessions, we've got a Rolls Royce and that shows everyone how great we are because we've got a Rolls Royce. Well, that's an example of how we're possessed by our possessions. We sort of reflect in our glory through an enormous $50 million house or yacht or a private jet or whatever, some of these people do. But it operates on the lower sort of scales as well. So, Jacqui and listeners, our understanding of renunciation in our lives is, and the other one I missed out on there is identification, attachments and beliefs. So beliefs, our beliefs that these possessions will bring us lasting happiness. So we even believe our husbands and wives will bring us lasting happiness. Our children will, our job will, the money we've got, whatever it is, they don't. Everything's constantly changing. The only thing permanent, Jacqui and listeners, in the creation is consciousness, the reality. Everything else comes and goes, changes, all sorts of things. So, Jacqui and listeners, our understanding of renunciation in our lives is extremely important. And we need to understand very clearly that much work needs to be done in these following areas. We all know we've got feelings. We all know we've got habits. We all know we've got judgments, expectations, opinions, fears, thoughts, likes, dislikes, and so on, and desires. That's true, Jacqui. We all got those.
We do indeed.
Well, that's where all the work, I've mentioned before in podcasts, that's the engine room of our being, what's called the subtle aspect. And I'll show my diagram again in a few seconds. That's the engine room. That's the workplace for everyone. So if I hold that diagram up again, Jacqui, can we see that? Yeah. So that's us. So that's the physical, and this is the subtle, and that's our spiritual, our higher nature. So that doesn't change. That's perfect. We don't have to do anything about that. That's our divine aspect, but that's where we're wanting to operate from. We tend to operate from our physical body, the five senses that bring information into the emotional path, and then the mind runs with it. This is what I call, Jacqui, the USB stick. You giggled at that. It's a computer program or a memory stick these days or whatever it is.
I giggle because it's outdated technology. Some of our listeners don't even know what that is, I'm guessing.
Okay. Well, I'm trying to use just a computer program. That's where we've programmed in our film called Me and My Life. And we're now examining that. When I say an unexamined life is not worth living, Don't worry about examining your physical features. Don't worry about examining your higher self. That's pure. The body just ages as the years go by. You're probably all realizing that. But and you can't change any of that, and you can't change any of that. The only thing you can change in a human being is this middle section. And this is your two rulers, the ego, or two potential rulers, the ego and the buddhi. They're the ones holding or capable of holding the reins of this chariot, your vehicle, your ship that's ferrying you through this lifetime. So that's why I'm putting this. This is where the renunciation takes place, all right, or doesn't take place. That's it. And while I'm on diagrams, I'll show this one. I don't think I've shown this one before, Jacqui. But this is Shankara's 5 steps to self-realization. And he says knowledge is one of the critical things. He boils down the whole journey, listeners. If you're watching this, most of you are driving, so don't look at your camera or whatever. But if anyone's watching these podcasts, these are the diagrams I sometimes hold up. So he says knowledge plus renunciation, which normally, or what we've been talking about, is action, right action. But the right action put into practice leads to wisdom. So that's the what's the word? I've got virtuous mind. That's where we become wiser, the purified being. Underneath, you can see on the top, that's our next chapter, meditation. So under the stillness of meditation, we learn better, understand better, put it into practice more frequently and more determinedly, and purify the system. Understand, Jacqui? And then driving it all for Shankara and for the person who eventually seeking self-realization, liberation, there's a burning desire for liberation. At this stage, that probably doesn't exist for many people, but hopefully it does for some, and hopefully that, but there is a flame going there, a little fire for everyone that's saying, I've got a desire, a strong desire for all of this. And that'll gradually increase, like a bonfire, a little bonfire starts and then becomes a raging bushfire. So it'll consume the being, and in the sense that they'll want to burn their mortal aspect, their mortal existence, and that's called the burning of the sanskara in Sanskrit language. But these are the 4 ingredients that are essential to do that. We've been focusing heavily on this and on that. Now we're going on to this. So it's that renunciation, that's what I'm referring to now, is where most of all of the work that will need to take place. All right, Jacqui?
Very good.
So I'm getting now to tracking on time very nicely, Jacqui, so you can...
Good. I can breathe a sigh of relief. Excellent.
So to finish off that last little bit about all of that subtle aspect where the changes need to take place, we believe that these are all our treasures. I touched on that at the start, and we don't want to give them up. That's why there's that initial feeling that you experienced and described of tensing up, of a bit of anxiety. What am I supposed to give up? Well, we love all our opinions and our likes and ideas, and we think they're all fantastic. We love them. We even build a huge wall around them. Sometimes, so in the biblical stories, that's the story of the walls of Jericho. When Joshua gets the trumpeters to blow the sound of the trumpets, it's the sound of truth that's being referred to there, and that makes the walls that we've got around our USB stick or our computer program around our heart crumble and break down, so we can let in new stuff, but also let out all the stuff that stinks and is rotten, is untrue. You might remember in my example when I shared the beautiful experience I had at that battle scene, and there was a Shakespearean reference. I can't remember it exactly now, but it talked about the muddied, foul waters coming to the shore. That's what sort of triggered it for me. So this lotus flower growing in the muddy waters is what I referred to when I was talking about it. That's the murky waters of life that we're all living in, and we're wanting to rise above into the sunlight on top of the lotus leaf. So listeners, Jacqui, we think these everything in that on that computer program is a treasure. We love it. We don't want to let it go under any circumstances. We love it. But when we start looking at it truthfully, like we're doing now, we come to see that it's not a treasure box, it's a Pandora's box. Most people would have an idea what Pandora's box was. When you opened it up, serpents came out and spiders and creepy crawlies and all the baddies of the world are all in Pandora's box. So that's the big transformation, Jacqui, with the aspect of renunciation, let it go. So now's the part you've been waiting for, Jacqui, the listeners have been waiting for. This is the fun part. We can all start laughing and high-fiving and having open a bottle of champagne. So now to conclude this chapter on renunciation, we finally get to the joyful aspect, everyone. You beauty. To help us get greater clarity on this, I'll briefly refer to the great Egyptian sage, Hermes Trismegistus. He's one of my favourites, folks. I love this guy. He was known throughout the lands at that time, 5,000 years ago, about the same time as Krishna's arrival on the planet, as the thrice great Hermes. He was regarded as the ultimate alchemist. And he was called thrice great because they felt calling him the great Hermes didn't give him enough acknowledgement or credit. And the great Hermes still didn't do enough. So they made it the greatest Hermes, the thrice great Hermes. Anyway, many of you, so I said he's the ultimate alchemist. And I go on to say here, Jacqui, that many listeners will probably have some understanding of alchemy, the word alchemy. There's books on, called The Alchemist and so on. Regarding a change, usually the notion that people have is, and scientists have worked on this over a long time, one way or another, trying to change something like a base metal like iron into a precious metal like gold. That's sort of the usual reason people are wanting to understand alchemy. It'll never be done, scientists, because the cell structure of the two are totally different, so don't bother trying. It's not what the story's not about that at all. Hermes' teachings in his Corpus Hermeticum spell out how to transform a mortal human into an immortal god. So that's why it's called the ultimate alchemy, Jacqui. You're changing a mortal human, which is this equivalent to a piece of iron, into an immortal god, the highest aspect that we all understand. And this teaching, and through renunciation, we can achieve that. We can change ourselves from a mere mortal to a greater mortal, step by step. It doesn't happen overnight. It actually take a few embodiments, but you've probably already done a few, and we're doing another one now, and you might have another one or two to go, who knows? But some of you might be completing it in this lifetime. Good luck. He says nothing in this creation disappears, otherwise there'd be a vacuum. And we pretty much all know that nature abhors a vacuum. You can't have an empty space. So in that on that computer program, if you let something out, you've got to replace it with something. Inside our heart, it's like that notion of the glass or the cup full. You can't put any more in, so you've got to let some out to put some more new stuff in. So we've got to remove some of those untruths, eventually all of them, to let in truths. You can't put truths into a full cup. So that's why there has to be this renunciation or letting go taking place. So he says nothing disappears in the creation, it simply changes or transforms. And a simple example is, we all understand water. It can change into ice, it can change into steam, it can change into raindrops, it can change into snowflakes. It changes, but it's still water, whichever way it goes. So the big question for us now, Jacqui, is how do we change? Why do we change? When do we change? These are the questions that arise, aren't they, in the human being when we're at this stage of our journey. So we very gladly and happily renounce any aspects in our lives when. So that's this aspect of we've got to shift something out to bring something in. So you're not going to throw anything out unless these following points. You begin to entertain higher values than what you currently hold. New knowledge, higher values. I want to stop being this limited mortal being. We become preoccupied with a greater mission in life. Our journey, we realise we're on a spiritual journey. We know there's a destination of some sort. We want to get to it. This is the higher mission now, that not worrying about a job or this or that. We're still interested in that, but we have these higher expectations, higher goals. Our values are set on higher and nobler ideals, and we eventually want to discover the supreme bliss of our own self. So this is what we're all aiming at, is it not, Jacqui, listeners? It's what we're all aiming at. Replace these lower ideals, lower expectations with higher ideals and higher expectations within ourselves. So we're beginning to see now that the joys of renunciation are many. This is the last bit, Jacqui. When we renounce the arrogating, that's the unjustly claiming ego, we become a personification of joy, happiness, and bliss. So when we hand the reins over to Buddhi, take them away from ego, we have happier, more blissful lives. We more and more relish the benefits of letting go any untruths. We become a person of inspiration. We see clearly the limitations of name, fame, and wealth. We understand the relative futility and unreality of the world. It's all like a movie. Everything's constantly changing. We become inwardly dispassionate and disinterested in the affairs of the world. Ask yourself, Jacqui, and listeners, are you starting to sort of be aware of some of these sorts of concepts? We turn into a spiritual person. We reclaim our birthright, which is our true nature. We eventually complete our spiritual journey, sometimes referred to as the prodigal son returning home. We transcend both my dream and the Creator's dream. So we've got not only our one dream to transcend, Jacqui, but this whole creation is a dream of the Creator. So eventually we need to get out of our dream, we get into the Creator's dream, and then we realise that's a dream as well, the whole world of illusion, and transcend that to reach the ultimate goal. And when we achieve this, we bring to an end the cycles of birth and death. That's the only way, folk, we can bring the cycles of birth to an end. Self-realisation, when we realise that we're not this mortal being that we've always thought we were, but we're actually, our true nature is an immortal, godly being. All right, Jacqui? And the last little sort of summary of all of that is the path to the Supreme Self, the way to the bliss of self-realisation, is the renunciation or the crucifixion of the egoic small self. That whole story of Jesus and this crucifixion and his resurrection is exactly what's being talked about here. When we crucify the ego, when we renounce the ego, let it go, get rid of it, we resurrect, we rise to our true self. All right? And before I pass over for you to have any finishing comments, Jacqui, because I'm pretty much done, I'll just quickly sneak in here the exercise for the listeners. Now, obviously, it's to do with the whole topic of Chapter 5, renunciation, and I didn't give you an exercise last week, so this will cover both weeks. But it's an exercise that you'll be needing to practice basically for the remainder of your life. Start looking within.
Just a small one then.
Yes. Start looking within to see what's untrue or false, what I showed on the diagram, your computer program. And don't be fooled. Ego's going to say to you, nothing to see here, move on. Yeah, because that's its job. Ignore it and start looking, probing. There's plenty there that's not true. Be firm with your commitment to renounce, get rid of anything you see in there that you recognise as not being true. You won't do it all in one go. But next year, the year after, as you get more knowledge, more used to it, keep looking into that treasure box, and which you realise is a Pandora's box, and get rid of all of those serpents, all of those untruths. And observe what's happening and how you're feeling. you'll feel that as you let stuff go, you'll feel lighter, you'll feel happier, you'll feel freer. So that's me done and dusted, Jacqui.
Beautiful. Lovely session, big session, a lot in there. And I feel like if we were all a group in a room together, we could spend hours and hours and hours, in fact, weeks upon discussing some of this. So
And
I think
that's
we
why
just
that's why I love groups, Jacqui. I'd sit back now and I'd say, right, fire away, let's go. And there'd be a million questions and we'd all be toing and froing. That's where greater understanding comes. Unfortunately, we can't do it in these sessions. We're limited in time anyway, but it doesn't lend itself. But people, I'm sure many of our listeners are going to different groups or having some conversations, you know, with like-minded people somewhere or other. So if you get an opportunity, listeners, to get to a group where there's truthful discussions taking place, I'd suggest you avail yourself of it. In the meantime, you've got me and Jacqui.
yes, yeah, that notion of community and like-mindedness is important. So really just a few thoughts from my perspective and considering our audience and stages of life for people, and also your enthusiasm, Michael, for the path to self-realization and this truth. I suppose I'm just conscious listening, and for those listening, thinking, be reminded, like it's a slow journey. I mean, you did reiterate that, but just a slow journey. It's a gradual journey. It's not often a linear journey. It's a little more cloud-like, and a bit over here, bit over there, 10 steps forward this way, 3 steps that way.
Exactly,
That
yes.
really is the path of life. You use wonderful language, but it, for me, sometimes I do think I'm not sure that all our listeners are right. We're on the path to liberation. Let's go. I think sometimes people are just thinking, I've just had enough of some parts of my life and I just want some other parts to be a little bit better, better, and that's enough. I think your knowledge is fabulous, and I think it's going to give people a lot to think about. But for anyone listening, if you do fall in the camp of I'm not sure if I'm there yet, marching down the highway to self realization, I would just say just keep going. Like take the learnings, take the information, let it brew, let it do its thing inside. And I think sometimes as we live life, certainly for me, more as a oh well, I don't know. It doesn't matter. I was just going to reflect on how I operate in the world. We're all different and we all operate differently. But I suppose we know whether we have the language or the intellectual concept for it or not. We often know when something's not quite right and we should be doing something else. I don't actually think that that's the hardest part. It can be for some people just tuning in to know, but for many of us, we do know. And actually, what's required is like the bravery and the courage to follow the impetus that we know to be more true and correct. And I even had a small example of this the other day. I was at work, some dilemma was unfolding. There'd already been many dilemmas before that. And I had a moment of just knowing the true and right thing to do here would be that. And in that moment, I really sat there at my desk. I'm like, oh my God, but time is so tight. And it would be much easier to go this way. There was that true moment in my life of deliberation. The right thing is this, but I would rather do that. And I suspect that's what you've been speaking a lot to today, which is the higher path sometimes often requires a lot more effort, a lot more conviction. And we have to be brave enough and prepared enough to take the steps in that direction to start moving down that path. So anyway, at this point, I feel like I'm probably rambling, but it just felt important to mention those few key items. And these are big, big topics. These are chunky topics we could spend a lot of time looking at. So if they're new to you listeners, just be reassured that hearing them, becoming familiar with them is a really useful part of the learning journey. And for those that are familiar with this language and you've been on this path for a while, well, obviously you just keep going in the way that Michael is reminding us of. And we all attune and know those moments when we have to be brave and move ourselves forward. But
Again,
yeah, thank you. Rich sharing.
you put it very very simply, Jacqui. But I'll just add a couple of little quick points to what you're saying. Firstly, just reminding you and the listeners, I've been working very diligently in 35 years of my life in this area. So yeah, I do have some higher knowledge and speak it confidently because I know how perfect and truthful it is. And it might sound a bit overwhelming. But the last point, Jacqui, is and in that sense, I'm still trying to paint a big picture for everyone. And I mentioned this right at the start of the introductory podcast, if people remember, where I said, when you asked me to do the summary on the teachings of the Gita, that it's the greatest, I feel it's the greatest work available to it, spiritual work to any human being. So we're working in, there's nothing higher that I'm aware of, and I've looked extensively. There's others that are sort of pretty much there, but nothing's above it. So that's our starting point. And but I'm just simply trying to paint in the limited time of these 40-minute podcasts for listeners to get a, as I called it, just some glimmer of the great truths that are in there. And the people, everyone will have to, put in a big effort one way or another, reading more material, finding groups, watching more podcasts, whatever's available to people, avail yourself of it. To keep getting and keep getting feedback, so that but all the exercises I've been giving everyone is, if people are practicing them, Jacqui, they would be seeing changes occurring in their lives. So you reminded everyone, and it's a very important point. You can't achieve this overnight. Anyone, don't make the job, because ego will want to get that. Oh, this is too hard. Go stop listening. It's no value to you. No, that's not the right. You got to have courage, like you referred to, Jacqui. Stick with it. Absorb. And I said earlier on, it's the sound of truth that does it. You don't have to remember all this. It's soaking into you like a sponge, and it's there. And so when you just said that the other day there's something happened, and you heard that silent voice, well, that's your Buddhi talking, and you went with it. And you said, oh, it seems a bit difficult. But when we start looking at it more clearly, we realize that when we actually follow Buddhi's prompt and do and say what's suggested, that it's much, much easier, comes naturally, than following the ego. Then it becomes difficult and ends in tears and arguments and all sorts of stuff. Anyway, I could go for, as you say, for hours on it.
One final little thing, Michael, which you can remind me of, because I can only remember the first steps of it. But I know often in various Indian philosophy, they speak of the different stages of life, 4 main stages. So the first 20 to 25 years is the student learning phase, learn as many things as possible. The next sort of 20 to 25 years, the householder phase, which you mentioned today, where we're often involved in, creating, getting married or partnering, creating families, working, mortgages, houses, all those sort of mortal everyday things that many of us are doing. Then there's the sort of retirement phase, but I think it's often phrased differently. Can you just take us very briefly through the wording for the 2 final stages? And the reason I'm mentioning this is just because at different ages and stages of our life, we have more time to dedicate as well to spiritual pursuits. So it just seems a relevant thing to draw in. Retirement phase, and then what's after that?
Well, I can't actually remember the actual 4 stages that you're referring to there, but I can certainly fill you in on the 3rd one, and really that would be the 4th one as well. I mean, I guess from a perspective of, for normal people, it'd be retirement, and they go on boat cruises and spend 5 days a week on the golf course or in the pokies, or whatever it might be, and then just sort of retirement villages and old age sort of catches up on you and things like that. But in the way I think you're asking the question is for the seekers, is that yes, those first stages, and you say about 25 and 25-50, and I think I might have mentioned, certainly to you, but I don't know if I mentioned to the people, but the number 7 is very important on the spiritual journey, or regarded as important, in that the creation apparently puts out an extra burst of energy, and I experienced it, and I've seen it happen with other people, so I fully accept it. So 7 sevens are 49. So at those 7-year intervals, people are more open, that people who are ready, it won't just happen to anyone, but if you're on the journey, you get an impetus from the extra burst of energy that'll inspire you and propel you and give you greater confidence and courage and so on. So you've got that period certainly from about that age, and it ties in with, as you said, your children have grown up, but by and large, you've usually got accommodation sorted out by and large. You know, your career sort of is under control by and large financially. All of those sorts of major important parts of people's lives are taken care of to some extent or other, but it allows people have that me time then, which you know, which is understood. So the people who are seeking truth can use that me time, do start using that meantime to listen to these podcasts, read the Bhagavad Gita, read the teachings of Buddha, and any of the great masters, immerse yourself in it. Keep putting all the teachings into practice. You know, let go untruths. All the things will flow once you're interested. Opportunities will arise, and you just follow the prompts if you like. And so you spend an enormous amount of time. As I just said, I've spent the last 35 years. So I woke up at about 47, nearly on that 49 mark. And since then, I'm 80 now. Every spare minute has been, and it wasn't a hardship, but I just loved it. As you said, you know, the enthusiasm. Most people say I'm very enthusiastic. I love the truth, and I love it because I've led two lives, listeners. I led a life of mortal for nearly 50 years, up to 47, and then I saw the light. Something happened in my life, and it pointed me in another direction. So the last 35 or so years, 33 years, I've been following the path of truth. And I've lived two lives. I've lived two worlds. And I've lived the underside of the lily pad leaf for that first part. And now I'm trying to live on the other side. And you wouldn't get me living below that. Even wild horses couldn't get me under that water anymore. I'm still on the planet. I'm still talking to you, Jacqui, and I'm talking to the people. I take my groups. I sometimes go to the pub and watch the footy and have a beer. You know, do all of those sorts of things. But they're not really of great importance to me. What's the most important thing for me in this week, Jacqui, is having this 40-minute podcast, which is now going to 50 minutes, with you and the listeners, with my groups on Wednesday and Thursday. They're the highlights. I said to one group very early when I moved down to Geelong at the University of Third Age, and I said to the group there were about 30 people, mainly at this retirement stage that you're talking about, the University of Third Age, designed for retired people. So they're all in their 60s, 70s, even 80s. And I said to them, oh, one of the highlights of my week is coming here and spending a couple of hours with you people every Wednesday morning. And one of the ladies said, oh, you ought to get a life. so I can still remember it vividly. Like, so she's saying I should live under the lily leaf more where she is. I'm trying to start teaching her to live on top of the lily leaf. So yeah, get a life. So anyway,
that's an excellent sharing.
yeah. So look, the last point, Jacqui and listeners, it's serious work, but don't become serious about it. Be happy in your life. Get as much joy out of it as you can. It's a beautiful creation. God's made it beautiful and plentiful. If people aren't greedy in that and sensible, you're there. It's meant to be enjoyed. You don't have to wear sackcloth and have ash on your head, as the saying goes. Yeah, but you'll find that by making these fundamental changes, which what everyone that's listening is doing, whether you recognise it or not, if you're listening, you're wanting change. You wouldn't be listening otherwise. It's simple as that. I've learned that over 30 years of taking groups. Those that are interested come to the groups. Those that are interested listen to podcasts. Those that aren't interested don't come to the groups. They don't listen to the podcast. So I'm talking to people, Jacqui, I know, who are to some extent or other, some more, some less, but they're all interested. Well, all I can say is just keep listening, keep reading, keep doing what you're doing. Little things, opportunities will crop up. avail yourself of them, and you'll progress. I can't make it progress for you any faster. I can't make you let go. I said that last week, Jacqui. No one can make you renounce. If you want to hang on to all those treasures, if you love them so much, your beliefs and your opinions and your likes and your feelings, attachments and desires, well, good luck. Hang on to them. If that makes you happy, terrific. But ask yourself, why are you crying? Why are you having difficulty sleeping? Why are you tense? Why are you anxious? Why you get angry? Why you get impatient? That will answer or, get some inquiry going in you as to why you love these treasures so much, because that's where it all comes from. So anyway, Jacqui, as I say, we could spend, you're interested. I could stand here. I could sit here all day and all night. I could talk 24 hours, as probably everyone's realised. One lovely student said to me, if you're listening, Mark, he said, you could talk under wet cement with a mouthful of marbles. I said, I said, that's a nice compliment. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I'd probably talk under it even when it was hardened, let alone soft cement.
Well, I'm glad
All
we
right,
can
Jacqui.
finish on that light note.
Yes.
Thank you. Lovely, lovely teachings. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in.
Thank you, listeners. I love you all. Keep well and practice letting go. Goodbye,
Beautiful.
everyone.
See you next week.